Welcome to today's explainer. We are diving straight into a story today that completely blurs the line between a psychological breakdown, a tragic family loss, and honestly, a terrifying supernatural escalation. What starts out looking like your standard, albeit incredibly sad narrative of sudden loss, yeah, it spirals into something else entirely. We're going to examine the anatomy of a curse, breaking down a really chilling account from our source material. It's got an unexplained death, a horrifying aftermath, and a final twist that is literally going to change how you view every single person involved in the story.
Ratchet, please save me. I don't want to die. Just imagine hearing those exact words echoing right in your ears, just hours after you've watched your spouse's funeral pyre burn. In our source material, these are the disembodied, haunting words that a grieving husband named Ratchet heard on his very first night alone. He wakes up with a massive start, and he's holding a photograph of his deceased wife, Shreya. But as he looks down at it, he realizes the photograph in his hand is actually bleeding. It's an incredibly terrifying hook, and it sets the stage for a really rapid descent into an absolute nightmare.
All right, let's start with Section 1, the mysterious death.
So the sheer abruptness of this tragedy is just staggering. According to the source, one day Shreya is perfectly healthy. She's happy, radiant even, and then the next, she just completely collapses. Richit rushes to carry her to the car to get to a hospital, but before he can even start the engine, she passes away right there in his arms. The suddenness of it all leaves Richit and his parents completely shattered. And because the tragedy happened at night, the cremation actually had to wait until morning. So Richit is forced to just sit beside his wife's body all night long, basically losing his grip on reality. By the time the funeral wraps up, we are presented with this deeply sympathetic protagonist, right? A husband whose entire world has just violently collapsed.
Moving on to Section 2, the terrifying nights. Let's actually map out how quickly Rachit's reality shatters here. After that bleeding photo incident on night 1, Rachit starts hallucinating Shreya in her favorite pearl white sari. She leads him up to the roof, disappears, and then suddenly, this flying, burning earthen pot, a handi, hurtles right toward him and explodes with a deafening blast. By day 2, his friends are stepping in. His friend Amin comes over, wants to take him on a trip to Manali just to clear his head. And Rachit's response? He stares blankly, picks up a heavy glass water jug, and violently smashes it over his own head. Then, by night 2, despite being heavily sedated by a doctor, Rachit's father wakes up because he hears whispering. He finds Rachit sitting in front of a mirror, giggling maniacally, before Rachit just violently smashes his own head into the glass, embedding shards deep into his skull.
So, now we have a real conflict. How do we actually explain this? On one hand, you've got the logical, medical perspective. Rachit's father and his doctor believe this is extreme trauma. I mean, the doctor stitches up his head and strongly recommends intense psychiatric help, warning them that Rachit is in active danger to himself. But, on the other hand, a much darker perspective starts to take hold. The very next morning in the hospital, Rachit's appearance has drastically changed. He has these deep, dark circles. And shockingly, half the flesh on his body seems to have completely dried up overnight. An experienced nurse, someone who has spent 10 years working in this exact hospital, pulls his parents aside. She tells them, look, no medical condition causes a patient's flesh to just wither away in a single night. She's actually the one who suggests they go find an occult specialist.
Which brings us to Section 3, the death spell.
So the family basically abandons modern medicine at this point, and they visit Maya. She's a spiritual helper and a devotee of Ma Kalika. And the process she goes through is intense. First, she places Rachit's photograph right at the feet of the deity. Second, she enters this deep, deep trance, chanting mantras. She starts sweating profusely, visibly shaken by whatever dark energy she's encountering. Third, she has to meditate for a grueling 2.5 hours. Why? Because whoever cast the spell placed these incredibly powerful supernatural bindings on it just to hide their identity. Maya does manage to break through just enough to write down an address on a piece of paper, but she delivers a really terrifying diagnosis. Rachit's discrepancy for energy is detected in 8.
Maya discovers that Rachit is under the influence of something called a Maran Kriya. As defined in our source material, we are not talking about a simple haunting or a mild hex here. A Maran Kriya is an unbreaking, highly targeted occult death spell. It's performed by a remarkably powerful tantric, a dark practitioner with one singular goal: to inflict extreme, inescapable suffering that ultimately ends in death. Maya warns the family that she absolutely cannot break the spell. If she even tries, she says the backlash could kill all of them. The only person on Earth who can lift it is the tantric who cast it in the first place.
Let's dive into Section 4, the tantric's warning.
Desperate times, right?
The parents take that address Maya gave them and venture out into the dead of night. They arrive and find the tantric, this menacing figure with a long black beard, dressed in a black dhoti. When Archit's parents literally beg for their son's life, the tantric delivers this absolutely terrifying prophecy. He tells them exactly what's going to happen. He says Rachit's flesh will completely dry up. His bones will be exposed. No medicine on earth is going to work, and the pain is going to be so unbearable that he will literally scream and beg for his own death. And when the parents ask why, the tantric just flatly refuses to lift the curse. He coldly states that Rachit ruined someone's life, and he is simply delivering the punishment that was paid for. And then he just slams the door right in their faces.
And guys, the tantric's horrific prophecy comes entirely true. Over the next month, the parents take Rachit to every healer, every doctor, every spiritualist they can possibly find, but nobody can break the Maran Kriya. Rachit lives a life that is honestly worse than death for 30 agonizing days. He physically transforms into a living skeleton as his body just wastes away. Eventually, he dies a really gruesome death, his remaining flesh consumed by insects. It is just an utterly tragic end for the husband. But the burning question still remains, right? Whose life did Rachit ruin?
Well, that takes us to our final act, Section 5, The Father's Revenge.
Picture this. We cut to a man standing in front of a photograph of Shreya. He's got tears in his eyes, but there's a smile of deep satisfaction on his face. And he says, "I avenged your death, my child. That monster made your life hell." Yeah, the mastermind who hired the tantric, the person who ordered the Maran Kriya and subjected Rachit to a month of unimaginable torture, it was none other than Shreya's own grieving father.
Talk about a plot twist. This completely shatters that whole illusion we had of the perfectly healthy wife and the sympathetic grieving husband. The hidden truth, as revealed by the father, is that Rachit never actually wanted to marry Shreya. He wanted to marry someone else. Behind closed doors, he made Shreya's life an absolute living hell. That sudden death we talked about earlier, it wasn't a mysterious medical failure. On the night she died, Shreya sent a final, desperate message to her father explaining the severe abuse she was enduring. And then, she committed suicide. Her father, knowing full well the justice system might never actually punish his son-in-law for driving his daughter to take her own life, turned to the dark arts. He hired the tantric to inflict the exact same level of torment onto Rachit that Rachit had inflicted upon Shreya.
Which really brings us to a deeply unsettling question to end on. I mean, this story paints a picture where the so-called victim was actually an abuser, and the villain casting the dark magic was just a grieving father seeking retribution. But when you look at the sheer horror of that Maran Kriya, the madness, the physical decay, the bugs, we really have to ask, was a father's dark, supernatural revenge against his daughter's abuser truly justified? Does extreme abuse warrant extreme, horrifying punishment? Or does resorting to such darkness just make the father a monster himself? It's a really complex, blurry line between justice and horrific vengeance. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this gave you something fascinating to think about.